Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We have done it, folks. We have made it to the last week of the season, and we still have a team alive and kicking, playing for a state championship right before Christmas. We have the Gunter Tigers with a thrilling victory in their state semifinals. They will play for another title, and we've done it. It's amazing. It's crazy to think we are in week 17 and we have seen everything that we have seen this year with our Texoma teams. And again, the Gunter Tigers are the last team standing, barely by the skin of their teeth with what they did last week against Canadian. So we'll talk about that, and we will preview the 3A Division II state championship that Gunter will be playing for this week. I guess the best place to start with what happened on Friday in Gunter's 21-20 Canadian win over Canadian is what happened before the game, because that sort of set the tone for everything I think that followed, in that you have the team on the way to the game driving out to Abilene Christian, making that 4-hour-ish, 3.5, 4-hour-ish drive, depending on how fast you make it, and they're on the home stretch. They're about an hour and a half out. They're on I-20, straight shot right into Abilene, and one of their buses gets in an accident. FedEx truck ends up hitting them, coming the other way, coming west to east. They're going east to west. Wasn't a direct head-on collision, thank God. But it was sort of if you look at the pictures and you look at the scene, sort of a glancing blow on the driver's on the front driver's corner, and the driver was injured. They had to take them to the hospital. The FedEx driver had to go to the hospital. But so here you are. It's about 2:00 ish. You're playing at 6:00. You got 4 hours till game time, and that happens. So obviously you're dealing with that. You're dealing with now your routine is thrown off. You're making sure everybody's okay. Thankfully, there were no serious injuries. This could have been a lot worse, based on the situation of what it could have been. But obviously, that's the last thing you're thinking about. You get your send off at school. You go. You're on your way. You're focused about what's at hand. Playing for another state championship. Maybe some kids are taking a nap. Maybe some kids are just on their phones. Whatever they're doing, you're not even. This is the last thing on your mind to have to deal with, and all of a sudden that happens, and you've got a game to get ready for in 4 hours. And then it became: is this game going to start on time? Is this game potentially going to happen at all? I think after the initial shock, it was obvious they were going to play, but how do now you're, like I said, your schedule's off. But they were able to kick off on time. But there's that whole backstory, everyone that's driving to the game, myself included, is seeing there's an accident on the way, and at first you don't even know it's them. You just know, hey, there's an accident that's blocking, that's got, the signs are flashing, I-20, all lanes are blocked. And now you're thinking, well, how am I going to get to this game? And then you find out it's because one of the Gunter buses was in an accident, and you're just like, oh my God. So that's already a side bar to this game going into it. And then we get to the stadium, and even before you get to the stadium, back on I-20 after the accident, and you start getting into Cisco, and there's a fog advisory, and there's not super dense fog, but it's dense in patches, and it's drizzly, and it's foggy, and that probably is about an hour and a half before the game starts. Probably about 4:30 ish, 5:00. Now there's fog, and then and again, if you see the pictures, you see the pictures before the game, you see the pictures during the game. I mean, it's visible. Like, this is not, oh, hey, it rolled in and then it rolled out, and we played, 3.5 quarters in pretty good conditions. It stayed foggy the whole way through, and both teams had to deal with it. And so there's that aspect to it. So now you're dealing with weather conditions. okay, you can think about rain, you know it's coming, but now you're dealing with fog, and I don't know how you change game plans. I think there were a couple of times you could see on some passes or maybe on some, on kicks, people really couldn't see the ball until maybe the last couple seconds because it's going up into the fog and then coming down. So now do you have to change your game plan in terms of how you want to attack the other's defense? Because there's a chance you might not be able to see the ball thrown in your direction. So there's that whole aspect to it. So we throw that in there, and then of course you throw in, this is the state semifinal, two great teams that have played each other a ton before. They've played close games before, so you knew there was a pretty good chance, even though each side had, this is in the previous 5 meetings, each side had a lopsided win, but the other 3 games were really close. Game is in the balance. The last close game of this 2019, Canadians driving, Gunter makes a goal line stand in literally as the game ends, and that's what won them. That kept the game from going to overtime, or Canadian potentially going for 2 and winning the game right there. So they have had a game come down to the last drive before. So you assume it's going to be close. You have 2 really good defenses. You have 2 offenses that have been able to put up points on other people. What are they going to do against each other? And so you know there's a decent chance it's going to come down to the wire. And you have a close game the whole way through, and then it comes down to the end that it does. And the end that it comes down to is one of those great sports moments that I saw coming in terms of how it was going to play out. I think a lot of people saw coming the way it was starting to play out, and it was somewhat unexpected based on what Gunter had done through 3 quarters, which was not a whole lot. And Canadian didn't do a whole lot either. This is a 21-20 score that's 14-7 at halftime, is 14-14 going to the 4th quarter. So points are at a premium. This is not a back and forth. This was not Gunter Franklin in the championship game last year where, it was like, boom, you score a touchdown, I score a touchdown. You stop me, I score a touchdown, you score a touchdown. And I think, when it's 35-35 going to the 4th quarter and somebody makes a couple plays in the final quarter and you have a 49-35 final, but that was back and forth, boom, boom, lots of scoring up and down the field, that sort of thing. This was all about defense. From more or less from the start, you have one side punts 8 times, one side punts 7 times. I mean, do we want to count up when was the last time either of these teams got to that many punts? It's probably, if they haven't all season, it's probably been, for Gunter, it's probably the Brock game, and I probably couldn't guess if the last time Canadian punted 7 times. But so you have all these things going on, and despite all the great defense, we don't have any turnovers, considering the conditions and everything. So it's relatively clean. It's just 2 hard-hitting, physical, athletic, chasing people around defenses, and making life miserable for the opposing offense. So we'll run through the first 4 touchdowns before we get to the 4th quarter, because obviously that's where everything turned. So Gunter goes out, stops Canadian on their first drive, and then ends up gets a score. Ivy Hellman has a 38-yard touchdown run. A little over 7 minutes into the game, boom, Gunter's up 7-0. Literally 2 minutes later, Canadian goes down, puts together a drive. There's like 9-10 plays. Cameron Cavalier, the Canadian quarterback, breaks off a 14-yard touchdown run. So in less than 2 minutes, game's tied at 7. Back and forth. So we're like, oh, okay, well maybe, hey, here we go. We are gonna get that shootout. Just based on that, we've already had 2 touchdowns. In the first 7 minutes. And then Canadian ends up getting. They put together another drive. Cavalier on a 2-yard keeper late in the first quarter, so it's 14-7. And you're like, okay, here we go. And then the second quarter, nobody did anything. A lot of punts. A lot of running into the line. A lot of keepers getting stopped for Canadian. And nobody even threatened to really score. So you can't even say, oh hey, somebody missed a field goal or somebody got in the other territory and fumbled. It was just there was a lot of it was Gunter was basically 3 and out, um, more or less in the first half after their the touchdown drive, and Canadian would like move it, but then they would get near midfield and then have to punt, and it was basically sort of a field position battle second quarter. So we go in 14-7 at halftime, and you go, okay, I guess it's turning into this defensive battle, and then and we almost went through the whole third quarter without there being a score. So we almost went, the 2 middle quarters no points at all, but Gunter gets a 31-yard touchdown pass from Walker Overman to Cannon Lemberg with 20 seconds left in the third quarter. It's a deep ball down the right side. Lemberg has his back to the goal line. He's almost at the goal line. Leaps up, catches it. There's a battle with the defender. They fall back into the end zone. They actually fall back over each other. There are people who want to say that was an interception. There's people that say it was a touchdown. I think it's really close to call. I think there's a simultaneous possession in there. I think when you see it in real time, it's really hard to tell because you can't see the ball 100% because it's in between them, and then they roll back over each other where you really can't see the ball. So does the receiver have the ball in his right hand at when he hits the ground, which I guess would make that a touchdown. And it all happened in one quick motion. And the referee called the touchdown. If he had called an interception, would there have been a complaint? I don't know. But obviously that's a key turning point because Gunter ties the game late in the third quarter, 14-all going to the final quarter. And you don't want to say the next team that scores is probably going to win, but there's probably a pretty good chance because, like I said, these teams are not running up and down the field and just having issues at the goal line or punching it in or somebody gets stopped on fourth down or whatever. These teams are having trouble moving the ball. But so Canadian gets the ball and puts together a drive. Cavalier again on a keeper. Scores with 6:09 left. They line up to kick the field goal. Now, initially, it looked like it was blocked. We couldn't tell in the press box. I don't even know if down on the field. It looked like because there was a huge mass of people, and so we didn't know if it actually what happened there. But it was not a block. It was actually the holder. After talking to a couple of the players, so I wanted to make sure I got the right guy who blocked it because it ended up being such a huge play. They said he caught it, and when he went to turn it on the hold, it slipped. So I don't know. So this may be where the weather comes into a factor or the ground, because there were some slick spots. If you were down, for all the Gunter people that were down on the field afterwards, you could tell there were spots on that field where in certain spots it felt fine, but other spots were very slick. And who knows if the ball just, as he went to turn it, and it just slid, and that was it. And so the guys on the kick block team said he basically went to get it, turn it, and it just fell to the ground, and everybody just kind of fell in the scrum, and that was it. But there was not, the ball did not actually get kicked, even if it was low. Nobody actually blocked it. But regardless, it's a huge play because instead of going up 21-14. You're only up 20-16 or 20-14, excuse me. So, and I tweeted it right as soon as it happened. I said that's a very big block because we thought it was blocked. But missing that extra point totally changed this game. Because now all Gunter has to do because they have to score a touchdown. They're not trying to get a field goal. They have to score a touchdown. And if they score the touchdown and kick the extra point, they're probably going to win. As long as the defense holds, depending on when the touchdown is scored. But they have a chance to take the lead. If they make that field goal, now Gunter knows, hey, we're probably going to overtime, but we got to score the touchdown regardless, or our season's over. So Gunter gets the ball. and they go 3-and-out. And you're like, well, that might have been it. But their drive only lasted like a minute and a half. So Canadian get the ball back with 4.5 minutes left. And so now you turn to the Gunter defense and you say, guys, you got to bow up. You got to stop them. We have to stop them. They gave up a first down, which was okay because there was still 4.5 minutes left. But they couldn't give up another first down. If they gave up another first down, they were going to lose that game. Now, they got helped out because there was a false start penalty that backed up, that turned a 2nd and 9 into a 2nd and 14, and Canadian was not going to throw the ball. They were going to run and make Gunter use their timeouts. They had all their timeouts. So Gunter is using their timeouts to stop the clock. And they run it on, Canadian runs it on 4th and 9 or 4th and 10. Or no, excuse me. They ran it on 3rd and 9, and it was 4, and then it ended up being 4th and 5. So that penalty was huge because that's 5 yards that they lost on the penalty. And also, if it was closer, there's a chance they go for it because they're about near midfield. They're like in between the 40 and the 50. They're 40 and 50. And if it's 4th and 2, if you go for it, because Gunter had to use their last time out to stop the clock on 4th and 5, they have a chance to potentially go for it, and if they get it, they win the game because Gunter can't stop the clock. Maybe they get it back with like 2 seconds left, but they're basically going to be able to run the clock out. But so they have to punt at that point. So Gunter's defense comes up huge. They get what they want. They give the offense a chance, and that's all you can ask for in that situation. Now, the other thing that I was thinking, and I brought this up with the people we were in the press box. So it's 4th and 5, and you're, like I said, you're at your 43, 44, whatever. Again, Gunter's out of timeouts. Now, if you're up 21-14, I think there might be some coaches that go for it, even though it's 4th and 5, even though you're on your side of the field barely. I wonder if Canadian goes for it, because if you get it, again, the game is over. But if you don't get it, you're setting Gunter up at about your, 45, let's say. Let's just throw out a number. So they only have to go 45 yards instead of what they ended up having to go. But if they do get it, the worst you can do is overtime, because it'd be 21-21 unless Coach Fizzell decides to go for 2 in that situation. And I don't think either one of them would have gone for 2. I think we would have gone to overtime. I don't think you risk a spot in the state championship game, as good as these two are, as historically good as these teams have been over the last 7 or 8 years. I don't think you would put everything on that. But if you're guaranteed that the worst you can do is go to overtime, maybe you think about it, because again, if you get the first down, you win the game because they can't stop the clock. But if you go for it and you don't get it, they only have to go 45 yards, and then they can win the game on the extra point. So that's something I'm thinking about as that's happening. Of, well, man, maybe that extra point just totally changed Canadians' thinking about trying to get out of here with a win. So Canadian has to punt. Canadian punts. They down the ball. Gunter takes over at its 19-yard line. So it's got to go 81 yards. There's a minute 43 on the clock. And they have no timeouts. And up until that point, you're talking about an offense. Now, this is an offense that for the game, finished with about 250 yards. And now there's a penalty in here that a pass interference that gave them 15 yards. So out of the 81, they didn't have to gain 15. So you take that down. So they had to gain 66 yards. So before this drive, Gunter only had about 150-ish yards of offense in the game. And now you're asking them to go 60-something yards to score the touchdown. And of that 150-ish yards, about 70 of it came on those 2 touchdowns. So Canadian has done a really good job of bottling up Gunter to this point. And so you're thinking, well, how are they going to pull this off? They don't have any timeouts. They haven't really had a whole lot of stuff work for them. But again, you're talking about, here's this team. You have all these seniors. You have all these juniors that have done so much in their careers, and they had a game. People don't like to remember probably the close games because they blow people out all the time. But I mean, just go back to early this season against Brock. If you look at that Brock box score, there's no way Gunter should win that game. But what do? They got a defensive touchdown. They got a kick return touchdown. They found a way to scratch out 21 points, and their defense was good enough to get the job done against a team that's going to be playing after them for the 3A Division I state championship against Franklin, ironically. They found a way to win that game. But if you look at that box score, it doesn't make sense from a yardage standpoint, from a first down standpoint, from all that other stuff, but they just find a way to win. And when you have kids that are in these, you have kids that are playing in their third or fourth state semifinal, that are playing in these games that have all the pressure and everything. What is this drive? It's almost next to nothing. Now, if this was a first-time team doing this and trying to get to state for the first time, maybe they're nervous. They're like, oh my God, we have to go score to make this happen, whatever. But this is a group. It's a veteran group that can, I think, you think is probably going to find a way, and they found a way. You have a almost no runs. You have one run in this game, in this drive. That was 12 plays. And it starts off with an incompletion. So now you've got 2nd and 10. But outside of that, you talk about trying to get down the field however you can, and they are able to get a first down, so they get to the 30, and I think this was probably the semi-turning point. So you get to the 30, and you throw a deep pass up the seam to Jace Martin. And this is important because that's the very first play that Gunter ran on this drive. And Jace Martin just missed it. Couldn't pull it in. It looked like it was going to be a big play, to maybe like the 30 or 35 or 40 yard line to Canadian, and he couldn't pull it in, but he was open, and he had a couple steps, and guys were tracing him to catch up to him to try to make a play. So Gunter goes back to that once they get the first down at their own 30. They run the exact same play, only this time the guy knows Canadian realizes what's going to happen, and the Canadian guy grabs Jace Martin so he can't break free, and he gets called for pass interference. And so 15 yards, and that puts Gunter at the 45. It's 45 with 1:17 left. So Gunter used 20-something seconds, and they're basically at midfield. They got plenty of time with a minute 17. And so from there, it's a lot more manageable. You got first down at your 45, and here we go. So again, we're semi-dinking and dunking because like every offense at this point, you have to get to the sidelines. Now you can go deep because the clock's going to stop on a first down, but everything that we're doing is going to the sideline. So we get 2 throws to Dakota Lowry for 6 and 9 yards at the sideline to pick up another first down. And then there's another incompletion, and then Cannon Ledberg with another catch for 12 yards at the sideline. That puts the ball at the Canadian 28 with 31 seconds left. So again, you're in a great spot. Incompletion on the first down. Go back to Lemberg twice. First for 5 yards. Then the big one here was for 13 yards on 3rd and 5, because that one picks up a first down. So instead of the next play being 4th and 5 and potentially ending the game, you get a first down. It's to the 10-yard line. So now you have 1st and goal. You got 4 shots at the end zone, and there still is and there's 21 seconds left. Now I'll go back because I overlooked it. The throw to start that drive, once Gunter got past midfield, Walker Overman tried to throw a deep pass to Lemberg on the left side near the end zone, and there's 2 Canadian defenders, and one is with Lemberg and one is coming over, and one or both can intercept it, and neither one does. They kind of half run into each other. One's got to slow up because they're about to run into each other, and it looked like one kind of knocked it out of the other's hands. That could have ended the game right there. I don't know if it would have ended the game right there, but they would have had to probably get a first down. Or I don't. There's a lot of action going on in this game. I'll take that back, but that probably would have ended the game. It almost certainly would have ended the game because obviously Gunter didn't have any timeouts. So that's obviously a huge play. And then Lemberg makes that catch. You got a fresh set of downs, and now everything is sort of on the table because you're that close to the end zone. If you want to run it, you probably can because there's 21 seconds. If a play takes 5 or 6 seconds, you could run something and then get up and spike it for 2nd down. So you're close enough that you don't have to try to go to the end zone immediately or whatever. But so Canadian calls a timeout. You know, they've allowed those 2 passes. It's 1st and goal at the 10. 21 seconds left. Canadian calls timeout. And they come out in a different formation than they went in with. They were planning on doubling. They weren't planning on doubling Lemberg on the right side. And then when they come out of it, I'm assuming they said, well, hey, they've gone to him, he's got the last 3 passes. They're probably going to go to him again. And so they doubled him on that side. So they came out in a different thing, and Gunter sees it. Gunter adjusts, and Walker Overman finds Ivy Hellman on the 10-yard pass over the middle, runs a slant, had a couple steps on the guy, and has a touchdown with 17 seconds left. And, of course, all Gunter has to do, kick the extra point. Preston Tarpley does so, and now Gunter's ahead 21-20. And now you have Canadian has to find a way to at least get into field goal range. They start at their own 30 with 13 seconds left. Incompletion, 9-yard pass. So they're at their 39. There's only 2 seconds left. They're going to have to do something wacky. They try to throw it over the middle, and pass is incomplete, ball game over. So Gunter had to sweat it out a little bit, but it was going to be really hard with 13 seconds after the kickoff for Canadian to realistically pull this off without some sort of crazy-ish play. But so Gunter finds a way. 21-20, when they absolutely positively had to have their best drive of the game and have guys make huge catches in huge situations, maybe get a little bit of luck, and get help by a penalty that was set up by the play they ran to open that drive because Canadian was worried about getting beat deep, and it almost worked, so they went back to it, and they had to. I mean, in hindsight, it's a smart play because if you let the guy catch it and he goes and scores a touchdown, you lose. So the 15 yards is worth it in that situation. But all these things have to come together, and they do. And it's just the little things. I'll say this too because there was it wasn't the drive before that. It wasn't the drive before that, but there's a drive in the second half where Gunter has an opportunity to take the lead early in the fourth quarter because it's tied 14-14, and there's a fumble in their own end, and the run goes into the line. There's really good push, and the ball pops loose behind everybody. It gets back knocked towards the Gunter end zone, and it's just lying on the ground. Anybody can grab it. Like 4 guys die for it. It looks like Canadians got it, but they don't. Roman Garcia, one of the linemen, jumps on it, falls on it, is able to get it. So instead of Canadian having the ball with about 10 minutes to go in the game, they would have taken over at the Gunter 26-yard line with their chance to go up 20-14. Now I know now Canadian ends up scoring after they force a punt. They put together a drive and do that, but you could have handed the whole rest of that game totally changes off of that because of the time difference. There's 4 extra minutes in there maybe. There's an extra possession for maybe both teams. That could have been a disaster if Canadian recovers that ball and they have 10 minutes to go in a 14-14 game that close to the Gunter end zone instead of having to put together a drive to maybe gift wrap them that touchdown. So there's stuff like that. There was a 4th and 2 that Gunter had to convert on the Lemberg touchdown. They decided to go for it on 4th and 2 at the Canadian 42, and Overman keeps for 5 yards. And if that gets stopped, Gunter's down 14-7. If you get stopped there, and not that it's a super short field, but you're basically giving the ball to Canadian at midfield. If they go and score, it's probably 21-7 early, or it's a 2-touchdown game early in the fourth quarter, and now you're going to score twice, not just once. And then 3 plays later is Lemberg's touchdown catch. So there were just a lot of things, when you have a close game like this that you absolutely need to go right, and Gunter did. And again, it was a great game. Somebody was going to lose this. Whoever lost this game, if it would have gone to overtime, tied at 21, if Canadian would have put something together at the end to go kick a field goal, a really good team was going to lose this game. And a really good team that was going to lose this game could probably sit there and say, we were probably good enough to win the state championship coming up next week. We just ran into a team that was just a little bit better and had a couple things go their way more than we did, and we got sent home this week instead of playing next week. So now Gunter's going to play this week. So they're in the championship game for the 5th time in 7 years, going for their 3rd championship since 2016. They're taking on Poth, who is 14-1. Poth won last week 51-28 against Big Sandy Harmony. We talked about that matchup a little bit in terms of obviously the winner of Gunter Canadian. That's who they were going to play. Harmony was the underdog. They came in with 5 losses. They had gotten off to a really rocky start, and they gelled as the year went on. Obviously made a great run to the state semifinals, and Poth ended up coming out with a win. This is the first time that Poth is in the championship game since 1968. They were the runner-up way back then in Class 1A. But you have a team here that sort of maybe thinks this is their time because last year they were in the region final and lost. So they made the region final last year and lose. They have their core coming back. And now, of course, obviously their goal, they're thinking, hey, we're going to go back to the region final. We're going to go to the state semifinal. And they did. And they got there and they said, well, hey, now we're going to play for a state championship. So let's go win that one. And they did. So they may look at this as this is their year, this is their team of destiny, whatever, that sort of thing. They've won 12 games in a row. Their only loss is 22-21 against Shiner in week 3. And so they're on a roll. This could very well be a matchup of undefeateds. It's that close. Literally coming down to 1 point. And from the looks of that may have been. I haven't dug into it deeply enough, but that score looks like that was a 21-20 game, and Shiner may have gone for two to win that game. Because it was at the end and they knew that they didn't want to go to overtime. But they've won 12 in a row. They're confident. They put up a ton of points. They last week was the seventh time out of their 15 games that they've scored 50 points. Out of the 14 wins, they've scored at least 41 points 12 times. So I bring that up because we're at that point. All these teams are good. All these teams have, nobody's getting this far with a team that can't score a lot of points. But you saw a team last week in Canadian. We talked about them coming in. They average just under 53 points a game. Their lowest point total had been 36, and Gunter held them to 20. So it's not. I don't think there's any team that you could throw out there that Gunter would be like, oh, we cannot slow this team down. They slowed down Brock, who obviously we've talked about multiple times because of Whitesboro, but their ability to put up points. They held them to 16 points. They held Canadian last week the way they did. So I don't think they're looking at, oh, look at this team that's putting up these big numbers against all these other teams because their defense is that good. I do think there is something to playing in that venue for the first time, which obviously Poth is doing. And again, we're talking about if you were a senior at Gunter, and some of them actually played in the game as freshmen, but if you were on the sidelines, this is the third championship game that the seniors at Gunter have been a part of. You lose last year in a game that's tied after three quarters. You were there as freshmen in 2019 when the team that you won your second title. Some of these kids, the Ethan Sloans, the Ashton Bennetts, some of these guys got on the field, contributed to that effort, and so they know what they're getting into. For Poth, it's a whole new ball game. They're having they've had two of the best seasons in school history the last 2 years, but again, you're talking about getting out there, running out of that tunnel, seeing all that, the whole thing for the first time. So obviously the experience factor is way on Gunner's side. But again, you have a team that I think they've earned the spot. And I do find it interesting because you look at a lot of these other matchups that are happening in the championship games, and there are some rematches. There are some teams that are familiar with each other, that have played each other for a championship before. And I think it's kind of crazy that Gunter has been, this is the fifth time, like I said, they've been in the championship game. This is the fifth different opponent that they will have played. Gunter is the constant. Gunter is the one that's always getting there. And you talk about going from Bowling to Newton to Paul Pewitt to Franklin and now to Poth. They haven't had their rematches like we talked about are in the region final. They're always playing Holiday. In the semifinals, they're always playing Canadian. But for whatever reason, they have not had a rematch. Now, if Franklin hadn't gone up to Division I, I think we would have had the Gunter Franklin rematch. Or the Gunter Franklin rematch from 2 years ago. Franklin would have been in the game for the third straight year. So, realignment had a factor in that. But I do think it's kind of interesting that Gunter has been here 5 times in 7 years, and there's not one rematch. That just seems kind of weird to me. Does everybody look at this as, oh, it's Big Bad Gunter back again in the championship game? I don't know. That is just an interesting thing. And then of course, you have a team that I think it's good that they got tested this last week. Obviously, you'd love to win a game. You'd love to win a game comfortably. You do have to win a game no matter what. But there's only been a couple of times that Gunter has really been tested this year. One was to Brock, and again we said they're playing for a state championship. Another one was Bells, who almost got the rematch with Gunter in the region final, and then of course last week against Canadian. So I do think it's good that there have been a couple of times this year where Gunter has been tested. I think a lot of times we see that teams that cruise and blow people out the way the Gunners and the Canadians and some of these people do, from 2A up to 6A, you don't get tested, and then you get to the third round or the fourth round or the state semifinals, and you haven't had a close game, and you haven't had to bear down and get a stop because you need to get the ball back to go win a game, or you just got to find a way to pull something out because one side of the ball is not doing what it had been doing all year because it's this opponent or whatever. And I think that's always, everybody wants to win games 59-7 and 85-0, and it's game's over after the first quarter because you're up 35-7, and we all know what's going to happen over the next three quarters and how many games have people played with running clocks and all that other stuff. That's great, and it's awesome to be able to be that good. But I do think there is something to see a team get challenged and be able to respond. And Gunter's done that at least 3 times against 3 really good opponents. And that's the other thing, too. They didn't have to do it like, oh, we played terrible and we barely beat this team that is not even going to make the playoffs. We just had a bad week. Their 3 closest wins are against 3 really good teams. And, the last team to beat Brock was Gunter. Obviously, Canadian, you beat them in the semifinals. And Bells, like we said, was a win away. Was 3 points away from playing Gunter again. And if Gunter would have beaten them again, the only thing that kept that would keep Bells from being in the state semifinals would have been Gunter. So I do like that fact. I do like teams that are tested. And no offense to Poth, but outside of the game that they lost, they really have not been tested. So that's one of those deals where, hey, we haven't been tested in 3 months. What's it going to be like if we fall behind, 2 touchdowns against Gunter? Or what happens if it's 14-14 going to the fourth quarter? How are we going to be able to handle that situation? Because there's not a lot of games when you look at their week by week. I guess they had one game where they against Tidehaven where they won 12-6 in the region final. But outside of those 2 games, they've got a lot of games that are blowouts, and I'm interested to see kind of what that may look like when you step onto the field with everything at stake. But again, it's a state championship game. You know what Gunter's going to do. What they want, how they want to attack both sides of the ball. And it's going to be really interesting to see if they can just hang in there. If they're not in the lead, it's almost like, okay, when is it going to happen? Because for Gunter it usually happens. And it has been interesting. I will say this too, and I'm not saying this to cover all my bases, but I will say this. The 2 championship teams for Gunter, 16 and 19, those games were not close. Like, they did not win a championship like they won the semifinal last week against Canadian. It did not come down to the fourth quarter. It did not come down to making a play on the final drive, offensively or defensively, or something crazy happening. They dominated their opponents in both of those championship games. So I don't know what that means. But like I said, we have seen them just last year in a game that was tied through three quarters, and then the other game they played against Newton, that was not close by the end. So they've seen a little bit of everything in these games. They've seen a close game. They've won in blowouts and they've lost in a blowout. So again, I don't think you can throw anything at Gunter that they're not going to be ready for or that they can't handle at this point in the season. But regardless, it's going to be a great finish because at worst you're the state runner-up for the second year in a row, but you're in the championship game again, and just adding to this crazy run that they've been on since 2016, and it's just been amazing to get at least to the Final Four every time, to play in the championship game now 5 out of the 7 times, to potentially be winning a third championship. It is just amazing that they continually find themselves in the spot, because it's really hard to do. I mean, it's really hard to do what Gunter has done since 2016. You know, sometimes you don't make it to the state semifinals. Canadian did that last year. Sometimes you keep losing in the semifinals, like Canadian has a couple times to Gunter. But to be able to basically be in the championship every year is just crazy. And I think Gunter's got, obviously they're there, so they have a chance. But it's gonna be really interesting to see, after the first quarter, where this game stands, because if Gunter gets out to a really good start, I don't know if you're Poth, if you go, the dream, this is where the dream dies. And again, it's a great season for them no matter what. But if Gunter takes advantage of that nervousness or whatever early, you have it can be real hard to come back for being in those spots. But I think it's probably I wouldn't be surprised if it's a great game. Because again, you have two teams that earn their way here, beat some really good people along the way. But both have earned their spot, and someone's going to earn a championship on Thursday afternoon at 3:00 at AT&T Stadium, the home away from home for Gunter. And of course, I'll throw out too. Volleyball had their great run, getting their first championship. And we go back to the end of last season with Gunter baseball getting to the state tournament for it's crazy to think that the last 3 state opportunities you've had their programs doing what they're doing. It says a lot about obviously the kids and the community and the culture and everything that's going on over there. And so now it's basically carried over the summer. You have what the volleyball team did last month, getting their first title, and here you have the football team with a chance to get their third in 7 tries, which is just crazy to think about. And any team would kill for just the 2, but you're in another position, which again I think a lot of people saw before the season. They were number 1 the whole year. The fact that they're in this game is expected, and now you just have to go out and win the 4 quarters that are in front of you, and if you do that, you're going to be a state champion again. So again, for all the people that are going, should be a great atmosphere. I don't know how many people are going to be sticking around for Brock Franklin, but if you're going to make a day of it, I think it's only $20, and you get to go to all 3 games. There is not going to any day at state. There is no better bargain than being able to watch 3 games. They're almost all really good. You go for the day and it's $20 for all 3 games. That's just fantastic. And you're talking about Brock and Franklin afterwards. Hawley Refugio is the 2A Division I game at 11 o'clock before Gunter plays. That should be a really good game. I mean, there's just a lot, and I will point out too, since we're just talking about state in general. So you have obviously Whitesboro's disappointed because Brock is here. Collinsville is disappointed because Albany made it to, after beating them, they won last week. After beating Collinsville in the region final, they're in the 2A Division II game that's Wednesday night against Mart. So obviously that's a bit of a disappointment for both of those two teams because they had a chance. You can sit there and say, well, that could have been us. We were one win away from potentially beating the team that might end up being the state champions. So, but again, if you are going, again, it's Thursday afternoon at 3:00. Like I said, the whole day should be really good. And like I said, $20, you can't beat that. So, should be a great one. Obviously, I want to be there. Follow me for updates at Jason Del Rosa on Twitter. We'll be getting a story up at some point after that, so everybody can check that out. And hopefully I'll be covering another state championship. I've been very fortunate in my time here that we've had a lot of teams and a lot of sports competing and winning state championships, and it's always great to cover a championship for any team in any sport. So looking forward to the game on Thursday afternoon. I'm sure a lot of people around here are as well. And then we will have our final edition of the podcast next week. We'll recap everything that happened and maybe kind of look ahead to what next season might bring as we wrap up another season. It's crazy to think about. Christmas right around the corner. State championships. Another team from Texoma is in it. And it's just crazy that we're at the end. But we got the one more game. So thanks again for listening to the podcast, and we will talk to you next week.